Ukraine has fallen off the headlines recently, though the war there rages on. Fierce fighting continues in the east as Ukraine reports massive blows to Russian military personnel and equipment. Meanwhile, chaos in Washington threatens the future of American support. With no speaker in place in Congress, aid requests by the president are so far dead in the water. Andrei Zagorodnyuk was Ukrainian defense minister and is now a government advisor, and he's joining me now. Welcome back to the program. Can I ask you, Andrei, whether you feel that your story and your existential crisis there is somehow fallen off the radar? Do you feel that?
No, we don't feel that. We, of course, see that that there's another major conflict started in the world. And obviously, it takes a lot of the attention, but rightfully so, because it's an absolutely unjust war and totally tragic. But we cannot say that this is an area where we're just fighting for attention or something like that. We expect our partners to be strategically minded, and that's what we see from most of the governments which we work with. And it's not about like who gets more air. It's about us following the strategic path with our key allies, key partners. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're looking at.
Yeah. So I understand you, but of course the narrative and public opinion is very important. But mostly also, it's not just about being off the air. It's about not getting Congress in the United States to be able to even put a vote to the floor to vote for and to approve or not what President Biden has asked for. Does that concern you, or do you feel you have enough for the moment to get through this crisis of paralysis in Washington?
For the moment, we have. We also see a massive support of American people. We see the substantial support of both parties. We do see that there is some political element, and there's a lot of political pre-election sort of a process, which sometimes some politicians are using Ukraine as a tool in their political battles. Sometimes they use the verbiage, and sometimes they use the approaches which we are surprised to see. Particularly when they misinform public about the certain things about Ukraine, particularly how the war goes or how the assistance provided and so on. But generally, we're seeing a support of United States, of U.S. people, and we are hoping and expecting that they would make a right decision according to their strategic interests.
So let me ask you about the counteroffensive then. It's obviously everybody, raised it to an impossible level and then started to talk about how it wasn't doing well. But in recent days, we have heard that your forces have broken through in various parts. The ATACMS apparently have been used against Russian attack helicopters and other such things. Tell us what you can about the state of the counteroffensive.
Well, Ukrainian forces are moving in some areas incrementally, in some areas with a limited success, in some areas with a much more success. For example, there's been a crossing of the Dnieper in Kherson area, and there's been a whole number of other advances. But more importantly, also, we need not to forget that Russia is currently starting its own offensive against Ukraine, particularly in the north of Donetsk, and it is failing. And we provide a lot of resources there. It's going extremely hard. There's again a lot of casualties, but Russia putting immense resources there. In the beginning of this interview, you mentioned that Russia has another a spike in casualties, and that's related to this process because they're just again throwing people to the fire regardless of the outcome. So that part goes is extremely intense, and but Ukraine is definitely standing on these positions.
Russian officials are speaking out about the Israel-Hamas war. Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, is warning that the situation in Gaza could lead to a regional crisis.
As for the Gaza Strip, the risk of this crisis escalating into a regional conflict is quite serious. I have already mentioned that the United States vetoed a resolution that called for a stop to any hostilities and to begin to resolve humanitarian issues. Therefore, the United States has apparently showed that it is not ready to call for a truce, a ceasefire. And if this is so, then they will probably believe the conflict may grow.
Well, for more, let's bring in Jill Doherty. She's an adjunct professor at Georgetown University, a CNN contributor, and of course, former CNN Moscow bureau chief. Jill, great to have you with us. You believe that Israel and Ukraine wars are linked. Explain to us how.
Well, there are a lot of, I think, complex interconnections, kind of cross currents. But I would say if you look at the immediate reaction that Vladimir Putin had to the attack back on the 7th of October, he blamed the United States. That was the primary thing. He did not go into details like, was this terrorism? He did not mention Hamas specifically. Instead, he said the United States is to blame. Why? Because the United States is monopolizing, as he put it, the Mideast peace process in general, excluding Russia from being part of that. And then Putin would argue American diplomacy failed. So it's essentially America's fault. And if you can see the same kind of logic, if that's what you want to call it, or messaging in what's happening in Ukraine. Putin also would say that the United States, the West, are behind what's happening in Ukraine. And there are many other connections. You know, I'll just mention one, that you're hearing kind of the same messaging about the developing world, the global South. This is something that back in the old Soviet days, the Soviet Union took the side of revolutionary movements. And you could say Hamas, Hezbollah, et cetera. Russia has better relations with them, even to this day. So Russia has now picked that up as a revived message, let's say, and says, developing world, we're on your side. We're on the side against the elites in the West, et cetera. So, I mean, there are many more cross currents we could talk about. In fact, Iran, definitely. Look at Iran. Better relationship between Russia and Iran. And guess what? Iran is supplying drones to be used in Ukraine. So many connections.
Yeah. I want to ask you about that, because how does Moscow's relationship with Israel, how is it affected by, his stance, Putin's stance, considering, as you say, Russia's ties to Iran that is supplying drones to Moscow for its war in Ukraine?
Yeah, it's kind of another complex situation, because actually Russia has, over the years, most recently, improved relations with Israel. But at the same time, when you look at Vladimir Putin's comments about the airstrikes by the Israelis on Gaza, he actually made a connection between that and the Leningrad blockade. And remember, Leningrad was where he was born in the Soviet Union, now St. Petersburg. And he actually made that connection, the Nazi blockade of Leningrad. So I think what he's again trying to do is not really directly take sides here, blame it on the United States and say we should have a peace or some type of ceasefire. But it's complicated for them too, I think.